Hey guys! Tonight, we're stepping into the gilded world of emperors. Well, sort of. You're the emperor. Technically, people bow. Coins bear your face. Children, learn your name. But behind the marble pillars and ceremonial trumpets, someone else is flipping the switches. Welcome to the strange twilight realm of the nominal emperor, a ruler with the title, but not the power. You stand on a stone balcony laced with ivy. The sun setting behind your empire's domes and towers. The wind smells like roses and roasted lamb. Beneath you, the crowd erupts in cheers as your name is called. You raise your hand. Just as they rehearsed. Fingers together, wrists stiff. They chant for you, their sovereign. But when you turn back inside, there's a man in robes thicker than your own, sitting casually on the throne you thought was yours. His fingers drum on your decrees. He smiles and says, "You'll sign this, won't you?" His voice is gentle. His eyes aren't. This is your first real lesson in ruling by name only. You wear the crown, but every decision needs advice, read approval. Your council meets without you. You're not even invited to half the meetings. One of your advisors actually controls the military. The other handles the treasury. Your job, appear benevolent. Be photogenic. Never cough during prayers. The reality of your position sets in like morning fog. You sleep in silk, but your words are fluff. Your empire is run by men you can't fire, and women who consider you charmingly useless. You're the monarch. Sure, but of birthday cards and commemorative stamps. This kind of arrangement isn't new. From ancient Mesopotamia to modern European monarchies, the figurehead emperor or king or empress has long been a political costume. Sometimes it's temporary. Sometimes it's intentional. And sometimes it's the only way to avoid civil war. Historians still argue whether some of these rulers truly believed they were in control. Maybe they knew. Maybe they didn't care. One French king famously said, "I see everything, and yet I do nothing." A humble brag, a cry for help depends on your footnotes. Even your morning schedule isn't really yours. Someone knocks at dawn. You pretend to be asleep. They barge in anyway, followed by a line of servants, advisors, religious figures, and at least one jester who won't stop singing about your socks. You nod, sign, wave, and get dressed by committee. The fringe detail you won't hear in textbooks. Some emperors got very creative in order to feel important. One medieval monarch insisted all food be blessed in 7 languages before he would eat. Another had a throne that secretly farted when ministers approached. Not exactly executive decision-making. But hey, it's something. And you, sitting there, 20 years old with an empire you can't control, start to notice the toll. You smile too often. Your signature cramps your hand. You develop a fake cough to get out of long meetings. There's always a parade. Always another ceremony. You've blessed more babies than a midwife and waved to more crowds than a street magician. Still, no one calls you before launching a war. You try to resist once. You write your own decree. It's a small thing, a new tax on imported figs. The next morning, that document is missing. You ask about it. The advisors laugh gently and say, "What a clever joke." Your Grace. The power vacuum around you is filled with ceremony. Every week brings a new ritual. Every month, a new portrait. Your face changes more on coins than it does in the mirror. And yet, paradoxically, the less you do, the more important you become. People trust you precisely because you don't interfere. You are safe. Neutral. Above the fray. The symbol of unity. Even if you secretly can't remember the name of your own general, your mother still calls you my little king. She means well. She's also arranging your next marriage to someone whose family just happens to control your grain roots. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and the current time in the comments. I love seeing where and when everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you close your eyes, you can almost hear the applause again. You smile? Raise your hand once more and silently wonder who's really pulling the strings behind the curtain. You sit on your throne, back straight, crown balanced with careful tension not just on your head, but in your life. This throne isn't carved of oak or marble. No, it's crafted from compromise, flattery, and ceremonial expectation. You look powerful because that's the assignment. But every polished surface hides a network of strings. The ministers file in with scrolls and sandals and the smug assurance of people who never worry about taxes. You're here to nod? They talk over you. You try once to interject something innocent? Like, should we really execute the baker for late grain delivery? They glance at each other. Then at you. And one says kindly, of course. Your Majesty. Unless you wish to handle famine complaints yourself, you back off? They smile. You sign. That's how the dance begins. Your seat may look glorious from the crowd, but underneath it's rigged with ropes tied to a dozen hands. Each one claims to support you. Each one is a leash. This is the paradox of nominal power. You're the center of everything, and yet utterly peripheral. Every law passed is in your name. Every war declared under your banner. But you weren't there. No one even brought you the maps. This sort of setup isn't just you. It's everywhere in history. Take, for instance, the child emperors of the Tang dynasty, adorable little sovereigns who couldn't even hold a brush, let alone command an army. Behind them stood dowager empresses and court officials who ran the country while cooing at the emperor's missing front teeth. Historians still debate whether this was a systemic necessity or a deliberate illusion. Was it better to install a harmless front while real power operated in shadow? Or was it just a way to keep power concentrated in the hands of courtiers who liked how the curtain muffled their crimes? The mainstream fact here: even some of the most powerful-looking regimes have run on this model for centuries. Byzantium, for instance, had emperors who spent more time writing religious poems than issuing orders. They presided over councils that vetoed their own speeches. If you were lucky, you got to design a coin. If you were really lucky, it had your correct title on it. Here's a quirkier tidbit. In one particularly chaotic Byzantine reign, the emperor was so ignored that he started dressing up as different saints for fun. One day, Saint George. The next Saint John. It became his thing, cosplaying holiness while his generals reshaped the empire in the background. And yet, the illusion matters. The idea of you is vital. Without your presence, people get nervous. The nobility starts sniffing around for new heirs. The merchant class wonders if their gold is safe. So, your body, your literal breathing. Waving. Gliding in on a white horse presence is non-negotiable, which is why your chair at court is always warmed. Your robes, brushed daily. Your meals, inspected by a man with 6 fingers and no tongue. Everything must appear smooth and regal, even if the gears behind the scenes are grinding. One day, you suggest you'd like to address the court in your own words. The chamberlain panics. The prime minister coughs. The scroll is gently removed from your hand and replaced with one that's been approved. It says nothing. That's the point. But you learn. Over time, you stop trying to speak. You become fluent in performance. You learn how to make eye contact that conveys approval without permission. How to blink slowly enough to imply wisdom. How to cry at just the right volume during national mourning. You are, quite literally, a symbol, a living logo. The Nike swoosh of empire. And the truth is, it's exhausting. You sleep in a gilded bed that's watched over by guards you didn't appoint? You wake to prayers you didn't approve. You dine on menus curated by health advisors who never ask what you like. Spoiler, it's roasted turnips. But no one listens. You think about escape sometimes? What if you just left? Took off the robes, walked out the garden gate, and lived in a cottage far from all of this. But the minute you entertain the thought, 3 courtiers appear to check on your health. One mentions herbal tea. Another, the importance of continuity. The third subtly reminds you what happened to the last emperor who took a walk. So, you stay. You wave. You reign. And the saddest, sharpest truth of all. Most of your subjects don't even realize you're a figurehead. They adore you. They write poems about your wisdom. Mothers name their sons after you. They believe in the illusion, and sometimes that belief is all that's holding the empire together. You sit on your throne of strings, look out across the vast chamber, and murmur the words you've come to master, as you wish. The courtiers call it imperial dignity. You call it sitting still for 6 hours while artists try to capture your nose with appropriate gravitas. You're supposed to be the sun around which this realm spins. But mostly, you're a painting in progress. And even that painting has to be approved by someone else. You want to stretch your legs? Maybe visit the armory. Check on the soldiers, but you're reminded, delicately, that your imperial presence is too precious for unnecessary exposure. Translation: you're not allowed to roam. The guards protect you from the world. Or, more likely, the world from you? There's a phrase that keeps surfacing in hushed whispers around court, a seat made of strings. You don't know where it started, but you feel its truth. Your throne may be high, but it's rigged like a puppet show. The arms move when others pull. The smile is wired to routine. And this isn't some bizarre accident. The system was built like this on purpose. Take the classic example from history, the emperors of the late Western Roman Empire. As the real power shifted toward generals and barbarian warlords, empereur became decorative. In the 5th century, there was Romulus Augustulus, an emperor so thoroughly powerless that even his nickname meant Little Augustus. Historians still argue whether he was a political tool, a tragic youth, or just a convenient placeholder to sign treaties. He was deposed before he even reached adulthood. No grand battles. No epic betrayals. A simple letter to Constantinople saying, "We don't need an emperor anymore. Thanks." Imagine ruling the Roman world and being dismissed by postal service. Quirkier still, his father, Orestes, was the one who had put him on the throne just so he could rule in his son's name. That's right. Dad made you emperor. Not because he believed in you, but because it looked better than ruling openly. That, friends, is what we call a seat of strings. It wasn't an isolated case. In fact, these puppet thrones were safer for the real power brokers. If something went wrong, they could always blame you. You're the emperor. After all, who else would approve this dumb tax, or the failed war, or the famine-handling policy involving salted cabbage rations? It's you. Obviously, you're on the coin. They also knew you couldn't fight back. Why would you? You were raised to smile, not to scheme. Your education included etiquette, elocution, and how to bless bread, but not how to outmaneuver a chancellor or lead a coup. You're about as dangerous as a spoon. Still, there's a strange kind of power in being helpless. Because everyone needs you. The generals need your signature to legitimize their campaigns. The priests need you to bless the festivals. The scribes need you to stand behind their declarations. Without you, the machine starts to wheeze, which is why they never let you vanish. You must be seen. You must sparkle. You must, even when you're bored. Sit through 6-hour state dinners where the fish is cold and the speeches are colder. One noble recites poetry about your eyebrows. Another compares your wisdom to a goat's serenity. You're not allowed to laugh. That's against protocol. Back in your chambers. You look at the mirror. The robes look impressive, but you know better. There's ink on your cuffs from all the signing. There's a callus on your ring finger from the ceremonial scepter. You're tired. Not from labor, but from being on all the time. You remember being a child? Thinking emperors rode into battle on dragons or thunderclouds. But the truth is, you haven't made a real decision in years. You once tried to delay the harvest festival by a week because your foot hurt. The response: 5 committees, 2 religious panels, and 1 emergency seance with your dead grandfather to decide if your gout was a national omen. It wasn't. But the sheer effort to keep you symbolic is something to behold. They maintain your sacred lineage with endless genealogies that conveniently skip over awkward affairs or disputed claims. They inflate your titles until even your page boys can't remember them. Divine Lord of the Horizon. Custodian of Stars. Emperor by grace and popular request, it's a whole resume in every greeting. And yet, despite all that fluff, despite the absence of authority, there's still this core truth without you. The facade crumbles. The generals are too violent. The priests, too fractured. The ministers, too busy stealing from each other. You, with your soft voice and ritual hand waves, are the thread holding the quilt together. It's funny, in a twisted way. The emperor has no clothes. Oh no. You do. You have all the clothes. Embroidered robes, gold-trimmed cloaks, tunics dyed with rare snails. But underneath, it's just you, unarmed, uneasy, nominal. And even that word, nominal, is a polite dodge. It implies you're still something, that you matter, that the position you hold hasn't been entirely hollowed out. Historians still debate whether that's true. Some argue that symbolic leadership is still leadership. Others claim you're little more than a wax seal with legs. The truth probably lives somewhere in the middle, like most truths. Inconvenient and hard to polish. But tonight, in your chambers, with the doors finally shut and the echoes fading, you let yourself say what you can't during daylight. I'm the Emperor. And maybe, just maybe, that counts for something. The candles are still lit as you lie on your ceremonial couch, which is somehow more uncomfortable than the throne. You are not allowed to snore. That would be undignified. One of your servants stands at the door, ready to rouse you gently, should anyone request your presence even at midnight, even for something as thrilling as clarifying the phrasing of a tax decree. Spoiler, you're not actually expected to clarify anything. Just sign, smile, and maybe look contemplative. You're beginning to understand the performance of power more than its practice. Being nominal emperor isn't about making decisions, it's about being seen making them. There's a difference. Subtle and irritating. The moment you frown during a council meeting, people start whispering, "He's displeased." They murmur, even though you're just thinking about figs. One slight eyebrow twitch and your advisors spend 3 hours revising a shipping law you never read. This is the strange duality of your existence. You are both everything and nothing. You are the still point at the center of the spinning world. And yet the world spins just fine without you. This brings us quite appropriately to the Byzantine emperors and the people who really ran the show, the eunuchs. Yes. Oinos. You'll hear the word a lot in Byzantine political gossip. You might even have a few in your service. They're smooth, sharp, and terrifyingly efficient. Eunuchs weren't just background staff, they often held real power. Some ran entire ministries. Others commanded armies. One even acted as regent for a child emperor and did such a good job that people started suggesting he be crowned instead. Naturally, he died mysteriously shortly after. Historians still argue whether eunuchs' rise was because they lacked personal ambition, no dynastic threats, no mistresses with expensive tastes, or because they were simply the only ones the emperors trusted not to start a coup. Either way, if you were a young emperor in Byzantium, odds are your most powerful servant had more control over foreign policy than you did. A quirky tidbit. Some eunuchs got around religious prohibitions on holding church office by getting creative with what counted as masculine. There are records of court theologians writing entire essays defending the spiritual purity of eunuchs, part holy vessel, part bureaucratic tank. And as emperor, you sat back and watched them maneuver. There's an official decree you're supposed to sign today. It regulates sheep dye in Thrace. You don't care. But the Textile Guild does. They've been bribing your ministers for weeks. The eunuch in charge of protocol tells you it's a vital issue of economic stability. You murmur your standard imperial phrase, as deemed appropriate by my most wise counselors. No one listens to what you say. They just wait for that one sentence. Still, you try to assert yourself quietly. You start attending more meetings. You read your scrolls instead of just nodding through them. You ask questions like, who wrote this and what happens if we don't do this? It causes a ripple. Ministers look worried. Your chamberlain checks your temperature. Then the pushback begins. You're accidentally left off the invite list for a crucial war council. Your favorite falconer is reassigned to border inspections. And your robes for the New Year procession? They're misplaced. You walk out wearing last season's brocade. The horror. It's a warning. Subtle. effective. A reminder that your power lives on the surface. Scratch too hard, and you'll find nothing underneath. So you adapt again. You begin wielding symbolism as your sword. You lean into ceremonial power blessings, oaths, rituals, processions. You realize something peculiar the more public your appearance is. The less the real power holders can contradict you. They still control your words. Yes, but not the effect you have on people. The crowd believes in you. Children, imitate your walk. Priest, quote your speech. You're a brand? That's when you begin rehearsing how you say things. Not just what. You emphasize pauses. You shift tone. You smile precisely 3 seconds after finishing a sentence. And when you make a small, off-the-cuff remark about justice for the common man, it ends up on prayer scrolls across the provinces. You're not powerless, just sideways powerful. And in Byzantium, sideways power could be more dangerous than outright rule. The Emperor Romanos Lecapeños was originally a mere admiral. He married his daughter to the young emperor Constantine VII, then made himself co-emperor. Constantine was reduced to ceremonial duties. Romanos ran the empire. But Constantine played the long game. He smiled. He nodded. And when Romanos grew old and complacent, he struck. The tide turned. Constantine reclaimed his power without a single battle. A seat made of strings. Yes, but if you trace those strings far enough, they can loop into nooses. You stare at your reflection in a polished bowl of wine. Your crown tilts slightly, as if it, too, is uncertain. You think about the eunuchs, the ministers, the old generals who call you boy behind closed doors. You could rage, you could fight, or you could wait. Nod. Smile. Bless the sheep die. Because the longer you sit still, the more they forget you're watching. The ink on the sheep dye decree is barely dry when you're summoned to the upper veranda. Not for a council meeting. Not for a state affair. Just a sunset viewing with your father. Or rather, His Imperial Highness the retired sovereign of the realm. Also known as the man who abdicated the throne, but not the power. Welcome to the very specific brand of nominal emperor unique to Heian, Japan, where sometimes the emperor retires early and becomes even more powerful in retirement. It's called Insei, or cloistered rule. And you're about to get a crash course from the master himself. You walk through polished halls of painted screens, slippers whispering against cedar floors. Servants melt into the shadows. Your father sits beneath a wisteria trellis. Robes impecable. Beard dyed with indigo ink to match his contemplative scowl. He's reading a poem his own about cherry blossoms fading too soon. He doesn't look up when you arrive. This is a man who technically gave you the throne 5 years ago, but he still issues commands. Advises ministers. Schedule festival. He doesn't wear the crown anymore. He is the crown. Ghost-like and immovable. You're the emperor. He's the puppeteer. He gestures for you to sit. Tell me, he says, how goes the sheep dye? You suppress a sigh. Stabilized. You reply, Thrace is vibrant. He nods. That's the closest you'll get to approval. You see, during the Heian period, emperors were often forced to ascend the throne at impossibly young ages, sometimes as toddlers while their retired fathers or grandfathers pulled the strings from monasteries. Cloistered rule became a kind of shadow governance. The retired emperor would retreat to a temple, shave his head, and then wield even more influence than before. Religious authority, aristocratic networks, you name it. Historians still argue whether this was a clever workaround or a deeply dysfunctional dynasty. Was cloistered rule a way to preserve imperial dignity while letting the real adults run things, or was it just power hoarding disguised as piety? Here's a curious detail. Some retired emperors even ruled over multiple generations of successors. That's right. Imagine being retired for 50 years while 3 of your children and grandchildren took turns playing emperor under your supervision. At that point, you're not a ruler, you're a franchise owner. And yet, from the outside, it looked perfectly orderly. Japan's court rituals were legendary in their complexity. Your every movement, glance, and breath was regulated. You once spent an entire morning learning how to properly accept a folded fan without insulting the west wind. It's exhausting, but it works. No one rebels if they're too busy arranging their sleeves correctly. You remember your own coronation? You were 11. The ceremony lasted 6 hours. You were not allowed to sneeze. You did sneeze. A court poet later wrote a metaphor comparing it to thunder rousing the plum blossoms. No one dared to call it an accident. And now? Years later, here you sit with your father, the man who taught you how to hold a brush but never let you write your own words, who gave you the throne but never let you rule. He sips tea. You mimic him. There is no small talk, only careful pauses. Then he asks, "Do you know what an emperor's most powerful act is?" You hesitate. "To command?" He chuckles. "Soft and papery. To resign." There it is. The lesson. Being nominal means knowing when not to act, when to let others do your bidding, when to become so ceremonial, so detached, that your absence becomes authority. You're not here to make decisions. You're here to bless the decisions already made. The court believes in your serenity, your aloofness, your untouchable distance. That's your superpower. And that serenity has weight. When you walk through the palace, ministers bow lower, not because they fear you, but because you have become a living myth. You're not human anymore. You're a poem, a painting, a lacquered mask. It's why, in Heian Japan, the emperor often had no political office whatsoever. You weren't expected to govern. You were expected to exist beautifully. Your brushstroke was law. Your glance, guidance. Your birthday, a national holiday. But sometimes you wonder if your face is carved on every wall, but your voice is silent. Do you still count as real? You glance again at your father. He's watching the sunset. Unmoving. This is the future that awaits you. Okiat Monastery. A long beard. A courtyard of koi fish and old regrets. You could abdicate in 10 years and still spend the next 30 telling your son how to breathe. Maybe that's the fate of all nominal emperors, to pass on the same strings they once wore. To become the silent architect of another's theater. The wisteria petals drift on the wind. Brushing your sleeves, you turn to your father and say, "I'll remember." He nods once. Already halfway back into his poem, The scent of sandalwood ink follows you back into the administrative hall, where the real business of the empire ticks away like a nervous metronome. You sit again, throne, scepter, robes, and listen as ministers murmur about grain quotas, silver weights, and the issue of a rogue tax collector who apparently declared himself a prophet last Tuesday. You nod politely. You sign what they place in front of you. And while your fingers move with imperial grace, your thoughts drift eastward, toward a dynasty that has perfected the art of symbolic rule, the Song dynasty of China. You've always admired their style. Song emperors, especially during the Northern Song period, managed to reign over one of the most culturally rich and bureaucratically refined empires in history, while also being, in many cases, tightly hemmed in by the very government that served them. The Chinese invented a system so intricate, so meticulously layered with officials and exam-based scholars, that the emperor often became a performer more than a ruler. You may technically be the apex of the system, but in practice, you are the beating heart of a ritual machine, and it's running whether or not your eyes are open. Historians still debate whether this was deliberate genius or unintentional neutering. The Song emperors were frequently poets, painters, calligraphers, sensitive souls. Some of them composed music instead of military orders. Was that a symptom of their irrelevance, or a strategy to keep the realm united under a cultured, unthreatening face? Here's a fun tidbit. Emperor Huizong of the Song dynasty, a man so refined he invented his own calligraphy script, once spent a full week choosing a glaze color for a teacup while his borders were literally being invaded. The cup was eventually perfect. The empire? Not so much. And you? Back in your own palace. Feel a kind of kinship, because you know that the more layers your government adds, the less it needs you to steer. You're a ceremonial engine. You open the floodgates of bureaucracy each morning by appearing in public, like a high priest turning on the sun. After that, the machine runs itself. Taxes get collected. Roads get built. Wars hopefully get avoided. In the Song court, there were 4 levels of consultation before any imperial order was acted upon. Even if the emperor wanted something done, it would pass through censors, secretaries, senior ministers, and memo scholars before taking effect. By then, the idea either evolved beyond recognition or got buried under its own commentary. The result? A monarch who was constantly writing, but rarely ruling. You think of your own scribes? Hunched like bats over scrolls, rewriting your speeches to match seasonal allegories. You once tried to sneak in a joke about pears during a harvest address. Just one line. It caused a 12-person dispute over whether pear had political connotations related to war horses. You never got your joke back. So now, like those Song emperors, you paint. You take up poetry. You compose small verses that no one reads but you. They're not great, mostly about rain on stone, but they are yours. And in a life ruled by scripts and ceremonies, that matters. But there's another side to this coin. Because when people believe in your image, even your silence becomes a message. A Song emperor's faint sigh during a memorial reading might send courtiers into a frenzy, interpreting it as displeasure. A slightly furrowed brow could prompt 3 ministries to rewrite tax legislation. You wield no direct power, but your presence shapes everything. You become an omen, a metaphor, a weather pattern, and that's not nothing. You begin to use it, slowly, You hold your brush a moment longer during court. You add an extra turn of phrase to a decree. You walk more slowly down the imperial hallway, just to force the ministers to sweat. You start to notice which ones shift uncomfortably when your gaze lingers. You're still a nominal emperor. Yes, but you're becoming a master of ritual leverage. And maybe that's what Song emperors understood, that in a state governed by performance, control belongs to the best performer. You don't need to command armies, you need to command attention. You can't overstep. If you push too hard, they'll clip your wings. Or worse, invite you to an extended meditation retreat in the Western Mountains. That's code. No one comes back from those. But if you play your part just right, if you glide, not stomp, you can outlast them all. So you rise from your throne with the precision of a temple bell. You dismiss the ministers with a slight wave. And tonight, for once, you write your own poem. It's not about war or governance or economics. It's about quiet and how loud it can be. The sun rises behind a veil of Cairo dust. You wake not to birdsong or incense, but to the sound of soldiers drilling, not yours. Of course, technically, you're the caliph of the Muslim world, heir to the prophet, commander of the faithful. But if you squint through the latticed windows of your palace, you'll see who really runs this city. The Mamluks. You're living in the 13th century now. Baghdad, Asfayin. The Abbasid Caliphate, in its heart, shattered by the Mongols, like a dropped ceramic plate. And yet, here you are, in Egypt, wearing the turban, reciting the prayers, signing the documents. They still call you Caliph. You still bless the Friday sermons. But the army, the treasury, the government, all of it belongs to the Mamluks, a warrior caste of former slave soldiers who turned the tables, seized the reins, and created a sultanate all their own. You, the caliph, are their decoration? Historians still argue whether this arrangement was born of religious reverence or political expediency. Did the Mamluks preserve the caliphate because they believed in its symbolic power, or did they just need a convenient holy figure to endorse their rule? Like an antique signature on a blank check. Here's the quirky twist. The first Mamluk sultan to install a puppet caliph literally went shopping in the ruins of Baghdad. He found a surviving Abbasid relative and said, "How'd you like to move to Cairo? We've got warm weather and excellent ceremonial duties." The man agreed. And so began a line of nominal caliphs who wielded no swords, but plenty of ceremonial robes. And just like that, your entire job is reborn as theater. You attend public prayers. You sign decrees prepared by others. You declare holy months and royal births. Sometimes, they even let you preside at feasts. Provided you sit where the Sultan tells you, you ride in parades. Not at the front, but just behind the real power. Close enough for glory. Far enough to stay harmless. One afternoon, you propose meekly that you'd like to appoint a new religious judge. A minor thing. The Sultan's advisors laugh, then quickly apologize. Of course. Your Holiness, we'll provide a list of approved candidates for your divine selection. And that's when it clicks. Your power isn't dead. It's been refiled under spiritual outsourcing. You are a figure of unity. Your very presence allows the Mamluks to claim legitimacy. Without you, they're just military warlords with a suspicious fondness for polo and execution. But with you, they're the defenders of the caliphate, the sword arm of the Prophet Bravit. All thanks to your silent, elegant nod. Your robes are rich, your days predictable, and your safety remarkably high. After all, no one wants to assassinate a puppet, especially not when you're such a useful puppet. You become adept at surviving the political tides. Sultans come and go. Some are cruel, others merely ambitious. One declares himself divinely inspired after a suspiciously convenient lightning strike. Another tries to appoint his pet parrot as royal advisor. Through it all, you remain quiet, serene, gloriously irrelevant, and therefore untouchable. Your palace becomes a kind of sacred museum. People come to bow, to kiss your robe, to ask for prayers. Children whisper about your holiness. Merchants leave offerings. Even foreign envoys treat you with reverence before they scurry off to negotiate with the Sultan. And then, one evening, a strange moment arrives. A letter comes from a distant Muslim kingdom. They seek your guidance in settling a theological dispute. Not the Sultan's, yours. You blink. You reread. The words are clear. They still believe you matter. That's when it begins a trickle of questions. Petitions. Requests. People don't trust the Sultan's scholars. They want the Caliph's opinion. Your opinion? And just like that, the power begins to return not by force, but by faith. You begin issuing subtle statements, clarifications on legal points, blessings for religious leaders abroad. Quietly, carefully, you re-enter the margins of relevance, not in politics, but in authority of spirit. The Mamluks don't mind. At first, they like how it looks. It makes them seem holier. But you're watching their faces now, measuring silences, calculating risk. You're still nominal, but not inert. You begin writing poetry verses laced with metaphors about false suns and veiled stars. The palace gods don't understand them. The clerics do. Your words circulate in ink-stained circles, in whispered madrasa debates, in the folds of merchant caravans. You've become more than a puppet. You're a presence, a ghost with a pulse. And perhaps that's what nominal power truly is. It's not absence, it's latency. It waits. It listens. And when the moment is right, it hums back to life. You walk through your garden, hands clasped behind your back. The roses bloom quietly. The call to prayer sounds from a nearby tower, rising like memory. You don't hold the sword, but you hold something deeper. And now, they know it. You dream of Rome? Of course. All emperors do, especially those who never get to set foot in it. Your boots crunch across the frosty grass of Aachen. Where your imperial court resides for the season, the palace chapel gleams with relics and incense. Your throne sits squarely under Charlemagne's ghost, and everything around you drips with that peculiar blend of piety, politics, and drafty Gothic windows. You are the Holy Roman Emperor, a title so glorious it barely fits on your coinage. But here's the catch. You are not in Rome. You do not rule Rome. And depending on how your last meeting with the Pope went, you might not even be welcome there. This is the long, winding road of imperial pretense that characterizes the Holy Roman Empire. From Otto the Great to Frederick Barbarossa, to poor Sigismund, who once got stuck in a robe halfway through a coronation. The emperors wore the title But the actual reigns were always tangled. Historians still argue whether the title Holy Roman Emperor was a true continuation of Roman authority or a medieval fan fiction with a really good marketing team. Voltaire famously quipped that it was neither holy nor Roman, nor an empire. And let's be honest, he kind of had a point. But titles matter. You are Emperor of the Romans, crowned by the Pope, anointed by God, destined to bring Christendom under a single, radiant umbrella of law and virtue. Except you can't get past Milan without someone torching your baggage train. Your authority stretches in theory across Germany, Burgundy, Italy, and sometimes even parts of Bohemia, but in practice, every duchy, bishopric, and Free City considers itself very independent. Your orders are considered, your taxes are delayed, and your summons to imperial diet often result in a polite note from some minor elector who says he's suffering from gout. He's not. A quirky anecdote, Emperor Henry IV once had to stand barefoot in the snow outside Canossa for 3 days to beg forgiveness from Pope Gregory VII. That wasn't just about sin. It was about control. The emperor needed papal approval to reclaim political credibility. And the Pope knew it. The whole empire watched him shiver. You might rule 1,000 square miles, but your real job is keeping the illusion intact. Your capital changes depending on which territory likes you best that year. Your coronation might be in Frankfurt, or Mainz, or somewhere random, like Regensburg, if everyone's feeling salty. You sometimes sleep in a tent with nicer curtains than your palace. Your entourage includes scholars, bishops, and enough cooks to feed a minor army, but the army itself belongs to your vassals. And they prefer to loan it out at weddings? You wear a crown. Sure, but half your day is spent traveling. You are a peripatetic emperor, always in motion, always just powerful enough to be respected, never quite powerful enough to be obeyed. And still, you cling to the rituals. You perform the mass. You kneel beside relics. You issue golden bulls covered in Latin, so ornate even the scribes get headaches. You hold court beneath tapestries of past glories. People cheer your name in a dozen dialects, even as they quietly defy your decrees the moment your horse turns toward the next city. Yet you are essential. Your presence, your idea, binds the empire together. Without you, the dukes fight, the bishops squabble, the economy freezes. You are the glue, the stage, the pageantry that convinces millions they are part of something larger than their village. Nominal, yes, but this title comes with weight. Even emperors with little control can issue imperial privilege. That strange medieval cheat code where you bless someone's power and suddenly they're untouchable. You can elevat nobles, grant town rights, or meddle in church elections, not always successfully, but often enough to keep people guessing. It's a game of optics and timing. You make a long, delayed progress to a rebellious region. You arrive slowly. Ceremonially, you don't threaten. You bless. You remind them of the order they're part of. You perform stability. And more often than not, that's enough to delay open revolt for another season. There's a legend about Frederick II. Maybe true. Maybe not that he once calmed a feuding town council simply by riding through the main square at dawn. Dressed in white, holding no weapon. He said nothing, just passed like a ghost. By nightfall, the The council had voted to honor his laws. That's nominal power in motion. You're not ruling like Augustus. You're not marching like Caesar. But you are being seen. And sometimes, in this patchwork empire of half sentences and full egos, being seen is the only power that matters. As night falls over Aachen, you raise your goblet to a table of lords who both flatter and ignore you. One praises your Latin. Another gently informs you that his city will not be sending taxes this quarter due to flood. It hasn't rained in a month. You smile. You nod. You toast to unity. And in the candlelight, your title shines. It's harvest season. And you're blessing rice again. Same robe. Different field. You lift the ceremonial rake with great solemnity, just heavy enough to look symbolic, just light enough not to strain your imperial wrists. The farmers bow low. The priests chant. The sun gleams on your lacquered hairpiece, as if the heavens themselves approve. You are the Emperor of Japan. And you haven't ruled anything in generations. No one tells you that outright. Of course, that would be rude. Instead, they say things like, "Leave it to the shogun," or "Your Majesty's wisdom has already lit the path." That last one means they've made the decision, and you're now expected to nod in profound agreement? Welcome to one of history's most refined examples of dual sovereignty, the Japanese imperial court, under the rule of the shogunate. Historians still argue whether the emperor's authority in this period was spiritual, ceremonial, or merely decorative. What's clearer is this: while the emperor remained the divinely descended monarch, the shogun held the swords, the tax rolls, and, critically, the right to decide who actually gets to do anything. Take the Tokugawa shogunate. For instance, for over 250 years, they ran Japan with a level of control that would make some modern bureaucracies jealous. All while you, the emperor, resided in Kyoto like a moth behind glass, beautiful, sacred, and untouchable. You held court. You named eras. You performed rituals so ancient, no one quite remembered their purpose. The Ninamasai. For example, your harvest ritual might be older than the written language, but while you were intoning prayers over rice, the shogun in Edo was rewriting maritime policy and deciding whether to behead or promote local lords, and yet, the shogun could not be emperor. That line was sacred, mythical. The emperor was a descendant of Amaterasu, the sun goddess. You couldn't become that, you had to be born into it. So instead of overthrowing the throne, they simply surrounded it with velvet ropes. The arrangement suited both sides for a time. A fun quirk: many shoguns would seek the emperor's blessing before passing major laws. It was all theater. But sometimes, the script got weird. One particularly pious shogun sent so many requests for blessing that the imperial court began issuing pre-blessings, essentially, standing approvals for anything not involving decapitation or foreign trade. Meanwhile, you, the emperor, begin to feel the slow erosion of agency. Your food is prepared by protocol. Your schedule is determined by astrologers and ancient precedent. One time, you tried to wear a new color robe during spring rites and nearly caused a court-wide meltdown because it conflicted with the rabbit hour. Still, people revere you. Pilgrims leave offerings. Monks copy your poems onto silk banners. Children learn your name before they learn arithmetic. You are believed in, even if you are no longer believed necessary. That belief gives you a strange sort of power. There are times, rare and delicate, when you can nudge things, a carefully placed phrase in a seasonal poem, a subtle reshuffling of shrine appointments, an offhand comment about a certain lord's virtue. These gestures ripple outward, passed along by rumor and reverence until they quietly shape decisions far from your palace gates. You've learned how to use silence like punctuation, because the truth is, if you ever do speak too directly, the shogun's advisors will descend like polite thunderclouds, offering clarifications, guidance, and opportunities to rest. One emperor, long before your time, tried to reclaim authority by issuing a secret edict. Within a week, his courtiers had hidden all his inkstones. So you work within the lines. And the lines, ironically, are sacred. Your rituals keep the empire's identity intact. The festivals, the prayers, the rhythms of the imperial calendar, they provide a sense of continuity that the shogunate cannot replicate with swords alone. Without you, the nation might fracture not in politics, but in spirit. It's a delicate tension. You are powerless by law, yet central by law. The shogun governs, but you reign, and everyone knows the difference. Sometimes, late at night, you walk through the cedar corridors of your palace, fingers trailing along painted walls. You think about how many emperors have done the same, how many felt just as ornamental, just as isolated. And then you remember something even more curious. It is precisely because you have no earthly power that your image remains unsullied. You are the emperor that never taxed, never warred, never betrayed. You are pure, untouchable, eternal. And when the shogunate eventually crumbles, when war and change return, you will still be here. Still shining. Because symbols, unlike regimes, do not die easily. You return to your chambers. Tomorrow is another rice blessing. And though you carry no sword, the sun still rises for you. You're staring at a velvet box, inside a ceremonial pen made from swan bone, polished ivory, and just enough gold to make you nervous. It's a gift from Parliament because they've just passed a war budget, and they'd like your signature. You're the queen. Technically, sovereign of a vast empire that spans continents, seas, and time zones. The sun, they say, never sets on your realm. But lately, it's been hiding behind committees. In this realm of red leather benches, powdered wigs, and very polite vetoes. You are the monarch, but to do anything more ambitious than bless a corgi or host a garden party, you need the approval of, well, everyone else. This is constitutional monarchy, and it might be the most exquisitely balanced form of nominal power on Earth. You exist at the very top of the state and also entirely outside its machinery. The crown reigns, but Parliament rules. Historians still argue when exactly this shift truly solidified. Some point to the glorious revolution of 1688, when William and Mary were invited to the throne only after agreeing to a Bill of Rights that clipped monarchical wings. Others claim it was a gradual fade. As the royal prerogative gave way to ministers and elections, regardless, by the 19th century, your job is mostly to look sovereign. The irony, you're very busy. The boxes of paperwork never stop coming. Speeches to read, but not write. Appointments to approve, but not choose. Treaties to endorse, but not negotiate. You're the face of diplomacy, but the Foreign Office does the handshakes? Here's a peculiar fact to this day. The monarch of the United Kingdom must grant royal assent to every law passed by Parliament. Technically, you could say no, but the last monarch who actually tried that, Queen Anne, in 1708, she vetoed a militia bill. And nobody's dared since. Because the moment you do exercise that power, the illusion begins to crack. You once asked your Prime Minister privately if you could withhold assent just this once. He looked at you like you'd asked to declare yourself a kangaroo. "Your Majesty," he whispered. "It's simply not done. So you don't. You nod, you sign, you wave. But you also watch, because while you may not write the laws, you read them. You attend weekly meetings with your Prime Minister. You ask pointed questions. You raise an eyebrow here. Pause a beat there. These little gestures, tiny flickers of theatre, can nudge the ship of state ever so slightly. A quirky example, Queen Victoria reportedly refused to knight a certain industrialist because she thought he was vulgar. The government quietly dropped his name from the list. She didn't command it. She just disapproved. Power by disapproval. A very British flavor. You begin to understand the rules of this elegant game. Rule 1. You must be beloved, but not political. Rule 2. You must be visible, but not vulnerable. Rule 3. You must be above the fray even when you're soaking in its consequences. It's exhausting. You attend charity galas, inspect flower shows, host heads of state with forced smiles and tightly choreographed chit-chat. Every hat is a message. Every word becomes a headline. A single glance can crash stock markets, no pressure. You once complimented a child's drawing of a dragon at a school fair. The newspapers ran a headline the next day. Queen supports mythical creatures as national symbols. You learn quickly. You learn quietly. And yet, you are still the center. Your image is on stamps, passports, coins, and tea sets. You open Parliament. You close memorials. You preside over ceremonies so old they predate the printing press. People cry when you wave. Tourists cheer when you drive by. Foreign dignitaries bow, curtsy, or attempt both and fall over. You hold no executive power, but you possess a gravity that cannot be legislated. No Prime Minister, no matter how elected, can match the weight of 7 centuries of crown tradition. And so, your silence becomes policy. Your presence, a stabilizing force. During crisis, you say nothing, and yet your very refusal to panic is seen as strength. During wars, your calm appearances remind people what they're fighting for, even during scandals. You're the clean wallpaper holding the cracked house together. One night, after signing your last document and slipping off your gloves, you whisper to your corgi, "I am not the government." The dog stares, unimpressed, but you smile, because the truth is, you are something else entirely. You are the backdrop of the nation's drama, the wallpaper of history, the quietly humming symbol that makes everything else look official. Nominal, yes, but necessary. More than ever, you're standing before a mirror in a hall of 1,000 candles, adjusting your collar while two ministers argue in the next room about where your gold should sleep tonight. Not you. Mind you, just the gold. Because even though you're emperor over a realm that spans oceans, you don't actually control your own treasury. Welcome to the uniquely tangled case of Spain's nominal emperors under Habsburg rule. The crown weighs heavy on your brow. But the weight pulling you down today is made of florins, ducats, and the growing suspicion that Vienna just spent your silver on someone else's war. You see? Under the sprawling reach of the Habsburg dynasty, Spain became a vast patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and colonial holdings. The man with the crown you might rule Spain in name, but your finances, your alliances, and even your advisors are heavily influenced by the family branch in Austria. The empire is yours, but the family business, not so much. Historians still argue about who truly ran the Spanish crown during the height of Habsburg power. Was it the emperor in Madrid, the archduke in Vienna, or some polyglot secretary juggling bribes in Brussels? The consensus is a shrug, followed by a chart full of confusing marriage lines. A peculiar anecdote: Emperor Charles V, one of the most powerful men in early modern Europe, once spent half an hour during a council meeting trying to figure out if he was speaking as King of Spain, Holy Roman Emperor, Duke of Burgundy, or Lord of the Netherlands. He gave up and just said, "Let's do what's best for Christendom." No one knew what that meant. And here you are, a century later, surrounded by titles like barnacles on a galleon. You're the emperor. Yes, but everyone wants to know which hat you're wearing today. Your ministers are divided along familiar lines. The Austrian side pushes for involvement in Eastern wars. The Spanish side pleads for reforms in the Americas. You suggest building a school for the poor in Castile, and are met with a silence so thick it could be ladled. You try to assert control. You ride through the streets. You appear at parades. You issue a letter expressing grave concern over corruption in Seville. The letter is received and filed in Vienna. So, you shift strategies. You become a master of imperial etiquette. You learn the dance of presence. You figure out when to bless a decision, when to delay it, when to disappear just long enough that your return is an event. You are no longer just a ruler. You are a living signal. Your appearance at a cathedral signals stability. Your absence at a court hearing signals disdain. Your hand resting on a noble's shoulder can elevate him. Your refusal to attend a banquet can end a political career. You become fluent in gesture diplomacy, and, as is the fate of many nominal emperors, you start spending more time with artists, poets, and cartographers. You commission paintings that subtly depict your role as pillar of unity. You invite scholars to write about your divine restraint. You fund architecture that whispers your values in stone and gold. One afternoon, you receive a letter from your cousin in Austria. He has used your name to secure a treaty. You weren't consulted, but the wax seal bears your crest. And the parchment begins with, "By His Imperial Majesty's grace." You stare at it, and in the margins, you quietly write, "I suppose so?" A strange quirk, despite the fact that you don't control the purse strings or the armies. Your image is still printed on coins shipped across the Atlantic. In Peru, miners carry them. In Mexico, merchants trade them. In Manila, your name is invoked in church prayers. You are everywhere except in the room where decisions are made. But even so, the illusion holds. Because illusions are sticky. They outlast budgets, borders, and bloodlines. You discover your greatest strength lies not in giving orders, but in absorbing pressure. You're the lightning rod of blame, the ceremonial cushion when policies fail. You know this. You've accepted it. And so, when a colonial rebellion erupts and a furious letter arrives accusing His Majesty of tyranny, you reply with the usual grace. We hear your suffering and pray for peace. Meanwhile, a duke you've never met drafts an army response. You're expected to stay majestic and distant. The public doesn't want your action. They want your symbolism. You are the silent clock face to which the gears behind the wall synchronize. At night, you wander the halls of your palace. You think about how your ancestors fought with swords and flame for this empire. You fight with silences, delays, and ceremonial dinners that last 6 hours. Nominal, certainly, but in the hush that follows every decree. In the pause before every policy, your name is whispered, and that whisper still echoes across the seas. The peacock feathers are fanned behind you. The silver parasol shimmers above your head. You sit motionless atop a gold-inlaid platform, surrounded by incense, mirrors, and finely starched British uniforms pretending not to judge your sandals. You are the Mughal Emperor of India, the scion of Babur, the descendant of Genghis Khan and Timur. Technically, on paper, in person, though you're more ornament than overlord, because the real power in your empire now wears a red coat and drinks tea at 4 o'clock. This is the 19th century, and you are a monarch beneath an empire that no longer belongs to you. The East India Company, that odd hybrid of corporation and colonizer, has crept into every chamber of your court. And while they haven't officially dethroned you yet, they've surrounded your throne with accountants, translators, spies, and men who carry ledgers more dangerous than swords. You still receive foreign guests. Of course, they bow, compliment your putri, and bring gifts of jam and porcelain. But the truth is, they're just here to make sure your signature appears on the correct ceremonial decree, written by someone else, in a language you're expected to honor but not command. Historians still argue whether the late Mughal emperors knew just how little power they held. Some say they were tragically deluded. Others argue they were acutely aware and simply played the game to preserve the dignity of the crown. After all, it's hard to declare independence when your bodyguards answer to a foreign trade company. One quirky and often overlooked detail: the East India Company paid the Mughal emperor an allowance. That's right. The man who once ruled from Kabul to the Deccan was now receiving a monthly pension from his colonizers, like a retired landlord, with a very, very fancy hobby room. You? Of course. Perform your duties with grace. You still ride elephants in parades. You still recite verse during Ramadan. You still inspect the royal pigeon coop on Thursdays. But when it comes to matters of war, diplomacy, taxation, and policy, you're given a charming seat by the window and asked not to open it too wide. There's even a company official stationed in your palace, whose job is to facilitate relations. His real job, to make sure you don't say anything too exciting. The last time you tried to issue a proclamation in Persian, it had to be reviewed for clarity by a man who once sold fish in Portsmouth. And yet, the people still believe. In the alleyways of Delhi, they call you Badshah, They touch your procession platform for luck. They chant your name when the monsoons fail, and offer garlands when they arrive on time. You may not rule, but you are still the emperor in the heart of the public. You begin to lean into this carefully. You write poems under a pen name. You sponsor scholars. You refuse to eat imported food during Eid. These are small gestures, but they add up. Your court becomes a refuge for cultural identity. Even as politics is stripped away, you are no longer the center of governance, but you become the soul of memory. And therein lies your quiet revenge. Because while the British wield control, they cannot replicate the emotional gravity you carry. They do not inspire loyalty, only compliance. They hold guns. You hold continuity. A British officer once wrote in his diary, "The Emperor smiles little, speaks less, but all eyes are on him when he breathes." That wasn't praise, it was concern. You begin to understand the new battlefield. It's not one of armies, but of attention, of symbolism, of survival through stillness. One evening, you walk the moonlit courtyard where your ancestors once plotted campaigns. You touch the marble wall where your grandfather had verses etched. You listen to the night, and you realize something strange. You're still here. You're not ruling, but you haven't vanished. And in an empire built on names and faces, being present is half the battle. You host poetry salons. You meet with visiting clerics. You commission a tapestry of your lineage, not as political propaganda, but as an anchor to the past. And in doing so, you outlive the company's arrogance. Because eventually, people tire of bayonets, but they never tire of stories. And when rebellion finally brews years from now, you will become the symbol it coalesces around. Not because you planned it, not because you led it, but because, despite everything, you remained nominal. Yes, but never erased. The ceiling of your palace is painted with clouds. But tonight you're more interested in what lies beneath your feet. The floors tremble not from earthquakes, but from the boots of generals. You, the Tsar of all the Russias, sit on a throne carved with imperial eagles. And yet it is your lover who writes your orders. Welcome to the glittering, precarious stage of imperial Russia, where the dance between real and nominal power is set to the music of court whispers and cannon fire. You may be the one with the title, but behind you stands a name like Thunder Grigory Potemkin. You're not the only ruler to be overshadowed by a lover. Of course, but in Russia, everything is bigger. The robes are heavier, the winter colder, and the illusion more elaborate. Historians still argue how much Catherine the Great relied on Potemkin for her rule. Was he her equal? Her puppet, or her puppeteer? Their correspondence blurs the lines between passion and policy, filled with love, threats, and land grants. Catherine signed her name with hearts. Potemkin responded with troop deployments. Here's the quirky detail everyone loves: the Potemkin village legend. According to critics, Potemkin staged entire fake settlements, freshly painted facades. Happy peasants borrowed from elsewhere to convince Catherine that Crimea was thriving. Historians debate whether it's true or political smear. But the story lingers, because it captures something very real: the empire, much like you, was running on presentation. And now, here you sit, a ruler, in theory, yet surrounded by others who shape reality. The court moves at your pace, but the decisions come from behind your back. Your lovers, your generals, your ministers, they've all learned the same trick: flatter the crown and act in its name. You tried once to make a real decision. A modest policy to lower taxes in a famine-stricken province. The reaction, a snowstorm of letters, concerns, and one particularly bold duke who claimed your sympathy was too French. Your decree was quietly reworded. The tax remained. So you stopped trying? Instead, you built your image. You posed for portraits in glittering gowns and chainmail. Sword in hand, expression fierce. You hosted foreign ambassadors with dazzling theatrics. You memorized Voltaire's works. You kissed babies in the street, but only if the lighting was good. You became the most beloved figure in the empire by never, ever letting them see behind the veil. And it worked. You were a star. But even stars cast shadows. You start to notice the edges of your power fraying. Court factions whisper about your moods. The Navy requests approval for ships you didn't know existed. Your nephew is seen more often at military reviews than you are. A letter from Vienna congratulates you on a treaty you've never heard of. And yet, they still bow. They still say, Her Imperial Majesty. They still act in your name, even as they erase your will. That's the paradox of nominal rule in the Russian court. The more visible your image, the more invisible your influence. So you adapt? You become a connoisseur of influence by proximity. You whisper compliments to the right generals. You attend the ballet with key landowners. You leave a fan on a council desk, not forgotten, but strategically misplaced. So they remember you were there. You drop hints in salons. Gossip becomes your edict. In one infamous incident, you change a policy simply by coughing during a speech. The finance minister reads it as disapproval and rewrites the entire tariff system. You don't correct him. You accept credit when it succeeds. After all, you are the Tsar. You may not command armies, but you command attention. And that matters more. Because, in Imperial Russia, power flows where the stories go. And the stories still start with your name. The poets still compare your gaze to fire. The newspapers still praise your wisdom. The people still cheer at your silhouette. You are not the hand behind the sword, but you are the seal on every victory. Without your approval, no one feels safe, even those who ignore you. At night, you look at your reflection in the frost-tinged window. The empire stretches vast beyond it. Forests, steppes, mountains, cities all yours. In theory, but you no longer mourn the loss of direct control. You've become something rarer, irreplaceable, because while power can be seized, love must be earned. And you, Tsar in name, Empress in myth, have earned something Potemkin himself could never fabricate. The people believe in you, even when the decisions aren't yours. Even when the war plans arrive sealed. Even when history turns the page. They still call you Majesty. And for a ruler with no reins, that may be the greatest power of all. They place a laurel wreath on your head. The crowd roars. A bishop mutters a blessing. You barely catch over the thunder of boots and drums. You rise, not by grace of God, but by grace of self, and in that one gesture, you remake empire in your own image. You are Napoleon Bonaparte. And yes, you are now emperor But the moment that crown touched your brow, a curious thing happened. Your empire, born from revolution and fire, began its slow dance with ceremonial illusion. See? You, crowning yourself, was not just petty showmanship, it was a signal. You weren't going to be another puppet of the Pope, or the Church, or even the revolutionaries who carried you to power. You would rule directly, on your terms, a man-made emperor by sheer will, but over time, even you would come to understand the strange allure and limitations of nominal power. Historians still argue whether Napoleon saw himself as Caesar reborn or just a really ambitious Corsican with excellent timing. But the fact remains, despite his battlefield brilliance, he spent extraordinary effort constructing the rituals of legitimacy that monarchs before him had taken centuries to refine. The quirky bit Napoleon literally hired old Bourbon court functionaries to teach him how to act imperial. He invented medals, rewrote ceremonies, even revived the old imperial guard, because nothing says fresh new ruler like costumes stolen from a defunct dynasty. And you sit now on his throne. You wear the uniform he tailored, carry the scepter he modeled after Charlemagne's Kamba, and find yourself tangled in the very thing he tried to escape the performative weight of rule. At first, your orders carry the sting of command. You reorganize provinces, restructure law codes, overhaul education, but slowly, the bureaucracy thickens. Ministers interpret. Generals hesitate. A committee is formed to advise. You blink, and suddenly, a policy meant to support veterans is repackaged as a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new fountain. The empire still calls you sovereign. But what they really want is a statue, not a strategist. So you oblige. You appear in full regalia for the public. You bless children. Quote, Virgil. And stand just slightly to the left of center so the light hits your medals just right. You commission portraits with lions and eagles, not because you particularly like animals, but because they symbolize might without argument. And yes, you sit for 5 hours while David paints you as both military genius and Roman philosopher. You later joke to a courtier that he made your calves look heroic. The courtier doesn't laugh. He's too busy noting whether the laurels should be tilted 10 degrees next time. But here's the catch. The more you lean into this theater of rule, the more it resists real change. You try to pass a law reforming trade guilds. It stalls for 6 months in a council of people who owe their entire careers to you. You propose a land grant for war widows blocked by budget concerns from an advisor who once fainted in your presence. Your name is still power. But now, it must be attached to consensus. Consensus takes time. Time dilute. Vision. You're starting to understand what every nominal emperor learns when you build an empire on appearance. You must constantly maintain the facade, or risk the whole thing crumbling like stale bread. And still, the people believe they wear your crest. They march in your name. They toast your glory. Even those in foreign lands whisper of your return. Your fire, your dream of unity, in taverns and salons. You are more legend than leader. Not for your latest policy, for your presence. And when you finally fall exiled, ridiculed, stripped of nearly everything, they still fear you. They exile you again. Just to be sure. Because even a nominal emperor can stir rebellions with a glance. There's a moment on Elba when a sailor asks if you'll ever return to France. You pose. And then, like every nominal ruler who still understands the magic of belief, You say softly, "They haven't finished writing my name." They march you through cheering streets. A wreath of flowers around your shoulders. Your boots barely touching the cobblestones. Canon salutes you. Orchestras play your anthem. And banners bearing your face flutter above balconies. You are Emperor of Mexico, and the people seem to love you. For now, welcome to the dazzlingly brief, melodramatic, and deeply awkward reign of a nominal monarch in a Republican suit. Emperor Maximilian I of Mexico. You didn't ask for this job. Not really, but you did like the idea of civilizing the New World with a blend of European charm, Enlightenment ideas, and questionables triunfacial hair. The truth. Your rule is a compromise, stitched together by empires, exiles, and opportunists. France wants a foothold in the Americas. Mexican conservatives want a monarch who will make liberalism look polite. And you want a greenhouse and some peace and quiet. Instead, you get a throne balanced on a volcano? Historians still argue whether Maximilian was a naive romantic or a well-meaning puppet set up to fail. Some say you were duped by Napoleon III. Others say you willingly stepped into the fire, hoping to tame it with botanical gardens and land reform. Here's a fun tidbit: you accepted the Mexican crown after a delegation of local elites showed up in Trieste and handed it to you based on a vote you never verified. You shrugged, trimmed your beard, and shipped out. That vote mostly fabricated. But by the time you found out, you were already learning Spanish royal protocol and practicing imperial nodding. Once in power, you do what every good emperor does: try to fix things. You issue decrees to improve worker rights. You restrict Landseitzeres. You try to balance liberal ideals with monarchic dignity. You even write long letters about abolishing corporal punishment. All noble. All deeply unpopular with the exact people who brought you here. Your court is a contradiction. European etiquette collides with Mexican reality. You throw lavish balls while insurgents skirmish on the borders. You commission Austrian-style uniforms that melt in the tropical sun. You speak in fluent diplomacy while the provinces burn. And then there's the small matter of the United States. They're not thrilled about a European emperor next door. Once their civil war ends, they politely, and then not so politely, suggest France remove its troops from your soil. Napoleon prêt, oblige, withdrawing the very forces that were propping up your empire. Your power, already shaky now, begins to evaporate. You issue orders, no one listens. You draft military plans, no one enforces them. You still hold court. Still, las cities. I still sign documents, but each day, your seal carries less weight. Your generals resign. Your advisors flee. Even your loyal wife, Carlota, is sent to Europe to beg for help and returns broken. Suddenly, you're no longer a ruler. You're a relic ceremonial while still breathing. A strange, dark quirk. In the final months, you still host imperial dinners. The table is set. The orchestra plays, but the guests are few. The laughter forced. The silverware trembling. You raise your glass to the enduring Mexican Empire. And everyone knows it's already over. You are an emperor in name. And now, even that is being revoked. The rebels surround the last loyal city. Your advisors beg you to flee. You refuse. Not out of stubbornness, but dignity. You believe that if you die as a martyr, your ideas might survive. The empire may be collapsing, but the myth can still stand. You're arrested, tried, sentenced. A morning comes, damp and cold. They tie you to a post. You refuse a blindfold. As the firing squad prepares, you hand each soldier a coin so they won't miss. And your last words: I forgive you, and may my blood be the last spilled for the good of this country. Bang. Just like that. Your title is erased, but not forgotten. Historians still debate the point of your reign. Was it a farce? A noble failure? A tragic example of misplaced idealism? But the people remember you not as a tyrant, but as a symbol of something oddly gentle. A man trapped in someone else's dream of empire. Nominal. Completely. But your shadow still lingers on balconies, in old ballrooms, and in the windblown petals laid at your forgotten tomb. The heat hangs thick over Hui. Monsoon rains have only just passed, and the air smells of wet stone and frangipani. In the imperial palace, you stand motionless, dressed in silk, dyed with imperial yellow, reserved for the Emperor of Vietnam, the Son of Heaven, custodian of tradition and moral order. You are emperor in title, but every word you speak is translated by a French advisor. Every document filtered through colonial supervision. And every guard outside your door carries a foreign-issued rifle. This is Indochina. And you, like your fathers before you, have become a ghost ruler in a house where only the walls remember your ancestors' authority? It didn't begin this way. The Nguyen dynasty was once mighty, militarily sharp, politically complex, and spiritually unyielding. But the 19th century brought French ships, French missionaries, and finally, French conquest. One treaty after another chipped away at your sovereignty, until you became a monarch without motion, a puppet cloaked in Confucian robes. Historians still argue whether the Vietnamese emperors of this period should be seen as collaborators, hostages, or survivors. Some believe they played along to protect their people. Others say they were too afraid or too well fed to rebel. You, living it, don't have the luxury of clarity, only the daily performance. A curious detail, even at the height of French control, the imperial court maintained rituals so old they predated even China's Tang dynasty. You hold court behind silken screens. You receive petitions through 5 layers of ceremonial hierarchy, and yet your royal seal must be approved by a resident general from Paris before it touches a single scroll. You try once to assert yourself. You pen a modest edict about restoring temple funding, a harmless thing. The French translator looks over it and says, "We find this intention fascinating." That's code. The edict disappears. The temple decays. You've learned the art of official ambiguity. So you channel your power into ritual, into appearances, into symbolism so thick that even the French hesitate to touch it. Your robes are not just robes, they are woven histories. Your court music, your calligraphy, your incense rituals, they become quiet rebellion. Because while France controls the roads, the ports, and the trade, they do not control the stories. And you are still the living center of Vietnam's ancestral tale. You become, paradoxically, more sacred because you are politically silent. Foreign officials bow to you in ceremonies, even as they overwrite your decisions. Locals still build shrines in your honor. Children memorize poems about your wisdom. Even if your voice is never heard in public, and then rebellion stirs. It always does. A whisper from the north. A rumor in the markets. A scribbled verse hidden beneath a rice basket. You didn't plan it, but they invoke your name anyway. You are the symbol, the rallying point, the imagined emperor who will return not to rule, but to restore. The French panic. They ask you to denounce the rebels. You delay. You host a poetry gathering. You bless a well. You visit a shrine to your grandfather, a warrior emperor who never had to sign treaties in someone else's language. You say nothing, but your silence is not neutral. It's terrifying. And now the French know what you've always understood. A nominal emperor who says nothing is more dangerous than one who speaks. Because silence invite projection. And when the people believe in a projection, they will fight for it, even if it doesn't exist. Eventually, they tighten your leash. Your movements are restricted. Your court is trimmed. Your face is removed from coins. They try to erase your symbolism, but they can't erase the architecture. Your palace still stands. Your tombs are still visited. Your imperial calendar, though ignored in law, still guides fishermen and farmers. You are no longer a king. You are something harder to kill a memory with a pulse. One day, when the colonial empire crumbles, when revolutions roar and new flags rise, your name will resurface, not as tyrant, not as fool, but as symbol of endurance, of continuity, of something local and sovereign that once breathed behind silken screens, and long after you are gone, school children will still write your name in careful, slanted strokes. Nominal, yes. But for a nation in chains, sometimes a name is all that's left to carry. The drums beat low in the distance, almost like a heartbeat. You sit upright on your steed, your cloak dragging like storm clouds behind you. The people cheer, but not for your commands. They cheer because you look like a ruler. You shine. You rise. You radiate empire. You are Emperor of Ethiopia, the Lion of Judah, heir to Solomon and Sheba. Your title is older than many nations. Your bloodline, sanctified. Your court, sacred. But now, as the 20th century claws forward, you begin to realize lineage means less than leverage, and myth alone can't move armies. Behind your jeweled crown, warlords sharpen blades. This is the era where tradition collides with rifles, where you rule from a palace surrounded not by ministers, but by men who control their own provinces, their own followers, their own private militias. They call you Your Majesty, but only when it suits them. Historians still argue whether the Ethiopian emperors of this period were divinely appointed leaders struggling to modernize or just elaborate figureheads, balancing regional fiefdoms like an overworked circus act. A quirky tale. One emperor, Johannes Gessin, reportedly allowed a local noble to build a fortress, so grand it rivaled the capital itself. When asked why, he smiled and said, if it keeps him loyal, he can build it out of gold. He knew he didn't rule by might, he ruled by permission. You've inherited that tradition. You sit at the top of a very tall pyramid, but it's built of brittle stone. Your advisors report that a southern prince has ignored your tax orders. Another has minted coins with his own face. You send letters. You offer blessings. You request meetings that never happen. And through it all, you perform the rituals of empire. You bless the rains. You ride in grand processions. You preside over ancient liturgies that stretch back to Axumite stone. The people still kneel when your name is spoken. But the decisions they're made in whispered deals, on horseback, or Borofias, and yet you are still essential because your existence legitimizes everything. The rebels claim to fight for you. The warlords say they protect your land. The church invokes your name in every mass, even when you are sidelined, ignored, or gently threatened you remain the axis. So you learn to steer by standing still. You rarely issue direct orders anymore. Instead, you drop hints, you host feasts, and selectively invite only those who've been behaving. You offer medals for loyalty and spiritual insight to mask political praise. You elevate obscure nobles from distant regions, not because they're powerful, but because it balances the powerful ones you can't touch. Your capital is no longer a seat of control. It is a stage. You play your part to perfection. You listen to complaints. You quote scripture. You pause dramatically before speaking, knowing that silence has power when everyone expects a blessing. And it works just enough, because as fractured as your realm is, no one wants to be the one who breaks it. You are not feared. You are not loved by all, but you are needed. And in a time where the winds of colonization swirl ever closer, the idea of a united Ethiopia under one emperor, your name is the only shield against foreign encroachment. One day, an emissary from Europe arrives. He is polite, curious, and subtly imperial. He asks about your army, your roads, your trade routes. You answer with parables. You smile. He leaves with glowing praise and zero actionable information. Because you've learned something. Precious mystery is a form of resistance. Later that night, you sit in your garden and watch the oil lamps flicker over Lake Tana. You hear laughter from the servants' quarters. You hear the prayers of monks in the hills. You hear your name carried on the wind, not as command, but as invocation. You do not rule like a king in Europe. You endure like a mountain. And that may be the oldest kind of power there is. Nominal. Yes, but in the eyes of the world, you are still the emperor. And that word, just that word, makes enemies hesitate. The candlelight flickers across the polished tiles. You swing your legs beneath the table, too short for the chair. Your feet not quite touching the ground. Around you, adults argue in hushed voices. Maps are rolled out. Reports are whispered. You reach for a sugar biscuit, and a hand gently stops yours. Not now. Your Majesty. You're 5 years old, and the fate of Brazil apparently rests on your pudding-stained shoulders. Welcome to the paradox of child emperors. You are Dom Pedro II, proclaimed Emperor of Brazil, at the tender age of 5 after your father abdicated and sailed off to Europe. Congratulations. You've inherited a kingdom, a crisis, and absolutely no idea what's going on. Your government, desperate for stability, has decided not to abolish the monarchy, but to freeze it, placing you on a ceremonial pedestal until you're old enough to wield power. In the meantime, adults will do what adults do: rule in your name, argue behind your back, and try to keep the illusion of empire polished and intact. Historians still debate whether Brazil's choice to keep the monarchy alive through a child's reign was strategic genius or political laziness. But the fact remains, you became the face of unity in a land full of fractures. Here's a charming, if slightly unsettling, detail when you were officially declared emperor. They dressed you in a miniature military uniform, placed you on a throne in a public ceremony, and had generals salute you. You didn't cray. You just blinked. One general wrote later, "He looked at me like I was a bird." You probably were thinking about snacks. And so begins your education, not in Latin or swordplay, but in how to be seen. Every morning, tutors drill you in history, politics, philosophy, and how to sit still during parades. Every afternoon, you are paraded. People cheer. Ladies wave fans. Ministers bow too deeply. You start to recognize the fake smiles. You start to understand that people expect you to be wise before your baby teeth are even gone. You are a symbol first. A person second. But here's where your story twists. Because while many nominal rulers remain figureheads forever, you don't. You watch. You listen. And slowly, you learn. At 12, you begin writing your own letters. At 14, you're fluent in multiple languages. By 15, you're reading scientific journals for fun. And when the Regency government finally crumbles under its own weight, and the nobles rush to declare you of age at just 14, you don't hesitate. You step forward, you accept the crown, and you begin to rule. Not just reign rule. The nominal emperor becomes a real one. But let's pause here, because even during your childhood, your powerless presence held real impact. Your image on coins. Your birthday as a national holiday. Your silent approval of policies, all of it carried weight. You had no command over armies. No, voice in parliament. No say in treaties. But you were the center of gravity. The excuse around which stability was built. One curious anecdote. There was a military coup nearly launched during your minority. Until one general argued, you want to depose a toddler, and the room fell quiet. You were too ceremonial to attack, too harmless to blame. In that fragile space, you survived. And what does that say about nominal emperors? That even children, raised in the theater of monarchy, can hold up a nation simply by being there. You think often of those early years, of the silence behind curtains, of the parade horses that seemed larger than houses, of the way people looked at you, not with love, but expectation, and you realize something that will shape your adult reign. Power isn't just what you do, it's what people believe you're capable of doing. And belief starts early. You touch your chin? Remembering the time a minister asked your opinion, and you? Proudly quoted Cicero. You were 9. He never asked again. But you remembered? That belief stays with you. You grow up beneath the weight of velvet and gold, and when the time comes, you don't shrug it off. You stand tall. You step forward. You make the leap that so many before you never could, from symbol to sovereign. But you never forget the boy on the throne. Nominal. Once, but now, not anymore. Flashbulbs. Velvet ropes. Glittering tiaras and carefully measured smiles. You raise your hand in a practiced wave, The royal wrist just so... While tourists press against fences to catch a glimpse of you in the backseat of a luxury car, somewhere, a tabloid headlines you as glowing. You haven't spoken in 3 days. You're a modern emperor now, a monarch of the age of media. Your realm is not the battlefield, not even the parliament. It's the camera. And in this glittering new kingdom of headlines and hashtags, you are nominal in the purest sense. No decrees. No wars. No command. Just symbolism, pageantry, and a very demanding public relations team. Welcome to the 21st century monarchy. You don't rule. You appear. Historians still argue whether this transformation into constitutional figurehead represents evolution or extinction. Some say the monarchy has adapted, become soft power, ceremonial glue. Others argue it's all just royal cosplay now, subsidized by nostalgia and tourism. Your daily duties include ribbon cuttings, hospital visits, and approving the holiday lighting theme on government buildings. You are apolitical, publicly, at least. Even if you're furious about environmental policy or healthcare cuts, you cannot speak. Your role is to smile in the rain and keep the nation calm. One delightfully strange anecdote: a European queen once vetoed a photograph of herself holding a shovel because her advisors thought it looked too communist. That's the level of scrutiny you operate under. Every expression. Outfit. Gesture. Strategically neutral. You walk a tightrope strung between centuries of tradition and a world that expects transparency, humility, and some digital literacy. Your tools of rule. A microphone you're rarely allowed to turn on. A wardrobe that sends diplomatic messages blue for calm, yellow for optimism, and social media accounts you do not operate, but which post charming behind-the-scenes shots of your corgis and teacups. Yet, despite the limitations, you are still incredibly powerful. Not in legislation, but in representation. You are the ceremonial body of the state. The person who shows up when no one else can, the grief magnet in times of tragedy, the figure who stands silently when the nation mourns, celebrates, or braces for the unknown. Your presence says, we are still here. We still have continuity. We still have a face. And sometimes, that's enough. But there's tension. Always tension, because you exist in a paradox. You must be flawless, but also human. You must be above politics, but also relevant. You must preserve mystery, but engage in modernity. One wrong move, one unguarded phrase or facial expression, and you become a meme, a scandal, or worse, a trending topic. You sometimes think of your ancestors, those who ruled with iron scepters and sharp tongues, and wonder what they'd think of you. Performing dance moves with school children for a mental health awareness PSA? Would they scoff? Would they envy the peace? Perhaps both? Because while your power is not executive, it is cultural, deep, subtle, and omnipresent. When you wear mourning black, the country grieves. When you wear white, it is wedding season. When you kneel at a memorial, everyone feels the loss more deeply. When you smile at a refugee child, hope blooms. This isn't the rule of law, it's the rule of narrative. And you are the central character in your nation's long-running story. A curious twist. In many countries, republics included, public trust in monarchy often surpasses trust in elected officials. People believe in your stability more than in their parliament. They look at you and see tradition. Unity, a national lullaby sung in pearls and protocol. And that belief makes you untouchable, not by force, not by fiat, but by consensus. You are the monarch of soft power. You live in a palace, but sleep in the glass house of public opinion. You are criticized, praised, misunderstood, revered. You are watched more than you are heard. But through it all, you remain steady, unshaken, because if you crack, the whole fantasy phrase. And in a world spinning faster each year, sometimes a familiar face in a ridiculous hat is exactly what people need. Nominal. Oh, yes. But in the spotlight, symbolism becomes sovereignty. And you've mastered the choreography. You're standing in your own palace, arguing very gently with a man about ceiling fans. You want one installed in your private library. Just one. Nothing extravagant. The heat is unbearable, and the pages of your books are starting to curl like sleeping cats. The man in front of you, a government clerk with the posture of a cactus, explains that such an installation must go through a civic request protocol and may require a parliamentary briefing. Depending on wiring, you are the emperor. Or so they say, but here you are, politely negotiating for airflow in a room you technically own, in a building named after you. While a clerk whose shoes cost less than your handkerchief explains why your request is administratively complicated, this is the final form of nominal power rule by ritualized helplessness. You can summon a nation to tears with your funeral, but you can't change the lighting in your reading nook. Historians still argue whether this is the triumph of democracy or the tragic erosion of monarchy. Either way, it's a long fall from absolute sovereignty to interior decorating submittals. And yet it's not meaningless, because power, stripped to its barest shell, still leaves behind resonance. You may not command armies or sign death warrants, but your very name bends protocol, like gravity bends light. Here's a delicious little anecdote. A former monarch in exile once wrote a letter to a foreign prime minister requesting a private lunch to discuss old times. The lunch was accepted not because the monarch mattered any more politically, but because the ghost of their crown still lingered in the room. And so, too, with you, your image is still printed on stamps. School children still memorize your lineage. Your birthday is still marked on wall calendars, sometimes with a little crown symbol. When you attend events, people stand. When you leave, they bow. You could ask for nothing more than the illusion of grace, and that's exactly what you get. But that illusion, it's sticky. You discover you can't go for a walk without it becoming a public moment. You can't write a letter without it being framed as a gesture of national importance. One time, you sneezed during a televised wreath-laying, and conspiracy forums exploded with theories about your health, your politics, and whether it was secretly a signal to monarchist loyalists. You think you just needed a tissue? Still, you persist. You wave at crowds. You shake hands in hospitals. You receive the annual basket of pears from the National Fruit Cooperative with solemn gratitude. You don't eat pears. That's not the point. The basket is the point. And sometimes, you play the long game. You drop a single comment in a school speech, something about unity, or care for the land, or how poetry reflects a people's soul. That quote makes headlines. A politician echoes it 2 weeks later. A funding bill for arts education quietly squeaks through a committee? Coincidence? Maybe. But you've learned that in nominal rule, coincidences are currency. You have no command, but your timing can still shake things loose. At night, you stare at your ceremonial sword. It hasn't left its velvet sheath in decades. It's not even sharp anymore, but it gleams. It carries the memory of what it once meant. And that memory projected on the national conscience still holds weight. You've come to accept this new physics. You're not a force. You're a fixed point. A pivot around which emotion orbits. Grief, joy, nostalgia, unity. You no longer ask for ceiling fans. You open the windows instead. And maybe that, in its own quiet way, is how power evolves, not in command, but in adaptation, not in force, but in form. You, the emperor, no longer rule. But when you rise, people still stand. When you speak, people still listen. And when you go someday, they'll write songs about how your silence held a nation together, even when no one knew what to say. Nominal, yes, but only by the most technical definition, because some names carry more weight than laws. And you carry yours like a crown made of breath. The garden is quiet. You walk slowly along the gravel path, escorted by no one. Your footsteps the only sound. In the far corner, a tour group is being told. That's where the emperor used to take morning tea. One child waves. You wave back. The guide bows, as if he's part of the scene. You are not the head of state. You haven't been for years. But the tourists still line up for your smile. The brochures still call it your palace. And in the souvenir shop, someone is buying a miniature figure of you in traditional court dress. This is the strange domain of symbolism over substance, the realm where monarchs persist as memories made manifest. You are the emperor, not because you command, but because the story requires someone to wear the robes. You sit now beneath a pine tree. Your grandfather planted. A plaque explains its historical significance. You didn't choose the plaque's wording. You didn't choose the pine, but people expect you to love it. So you nod approvingly when they mention it. That's your job. Historians still argue whether monarchs like you, those long removed from political power, serve as national glue or ornamental relics. Some say you're a living tradition. Others say you're a distraction from more pressing civic issues. But no one quite agrees what would happen if you were suddenly gone. And that's your leverage. Because while you don't hold executive authority, you are the ritual skeleton that gives national identity its shape. You are the holiday, the hymn, the postcard, a fun little detail in some nations. The monarch's birthday is still celebrated with fireworks and televised choirs, even if the monarch themselves is no longer constitutionally acknowledged. The people celebrate not you. Exactly. But the idea of you, the you that belongs to history, to continuity. Your days are filled with gestures. You light candles. You plant trees. You unveil statues. You host dignitaries at garden luncheons that are choreographed to the millimeter. You compliment local dishes that taste like paper. You smile at children with such practiced warmth that it should be taught in theater school. And behind-the-scenes committees. Endless committees who vet your speeches. Measure your pauses. Decide whether your presence at a museum opening might be interpreted as a political signal. Once, you wanted to visit a library in a rural town. The logistics team took 6 weeks to assess the optics. You cancelled. But your power remains, not in decisions, but in effect. When you lay a wreath at a disaster site, it heals. When you sit beside a grieving family, the news cycle slows. When you cry once, silently. On camera, during a remembrance ceremony, the entire country mourns with you. You didn't write the eulogy. You didn't sign the relief bill, but you carried the moment, and in a world that often forgets to breathe, that matters. You've also learned to leave room for personal invisibility. You rarely express your own opinions. Your favorite book is never revealed. Your politics are nobody's business. You exist in controlled ambiguity, where people can project what they need onto you. In this way, you've become something larger than yourself, a national mirror. People see what they want to see in you. Stability, tradition, innocence, grace, nostalgia for a time that never quite existed. You are both ancient and oddly new. A monarch whose crown is mostly metaphor, but whose presence still quiets crowds. And sometimes, when no one's watching, you wonder, is it enough? To be the emblem instead of the engine, the performance instead of the policy. Then a young couple approaches. They don't speak. They simply bow. Deeply. Gratefully. The woman is crying. You nod, and in that moment, you understand? You may not govern, but you anchor. And anchors, however ceremonial, keep nations from drifting entirely into storm. You're not at court. You're in a museum. The lights are soft. The air sterile. And under glass lies a velvet robe you once wore, next to a plaque that calls you a pivotal figure in your nation's peaceful transition to democracy. It's accurate, technically, but you remember sweating through that robe while the Constitution was rewritten around you. You are the former emperor, now part of the exhibit, but something strange happens. The line at your display is longer than for any battle map or oil painting. School children stare at your portrait like it's a movie poster. A tour guide murmurs. This was a ruler who chose peace. The crowd nods solemnly. Someone whispers, "Imagine still being alive after all that." You clear your throat. A few heads turn. You wave. And just like that, you're back in role. Because even when your reign is over, the shadow of your image still stretches long across your country's collective memory. You've become history's punctuation mark, the final flourish in a chapter about transformation. Historians still argue how much credit you deserve. Some say you bowed gracefully. Others say you were nudged or shoved out by changing times. But what everyone agrees on is this: you didn't resist. You played the part. Kept the mask on. Smiled at the crowd, and in doing so, you made the chaos smoother. That, in itself, was a kind of power. And even now, you're still invited to national events. You don't lead them, but you are always seated near the front. Heads of state shake your hand. Presidents call you Your Majesty, even when the Republic's laws insist you're a private citizen. You nod. Say nothing. You've learned, when titles fade, presence remains. A curious fact: your signature still appears on commemorative envelopes. 1 year. Someone suggested removing it. The backlash from stamp collectors alone nearly overturned the decision. You kept the signature. You always do, because for many, You're the last link to something stable, even if it never really was. So now, your power lies not in governance, but in memory management. You attend anniversaries. You plant trees at schools named after you. You give vague, graceful interviews about public service and duty and the honor of witnessing history. You say nothing controversial, ever. And yet, somehow, your words still resonate. Why? Because you're the symbol who stayed visible. While other monarchs faded into exile, silence, or scandal, you remained. You grew older in public. You weathered jokes, documentaries, opinion columns, and think pieces. But you never cracked the mask. You let people project onto you whatever they needed to believe. Some see a gentle reformer. Some see a relic of a better time. Some, bizarrely, see you as a secret revolutionary who made monarchy obsolete from the inside. You let them all believe, because a good nominal emperor knows symbolism is elastic, it stretches to fit the moment. It adapts to each generation's nostalgia. Sometimes, your name trends online for no reason. Someone posts a photo of you as a young monarch. Eyes dreamy, cape swirling, and writes, honestly, the original style icon. Within hours, it's been memed, remixed, turned into fan art. Your staff shows you, you chuckle. You've been reduced to a vibe, but a very stable one. At dinner, a diplomat raises a toast to continuity. You smile and raise your glass. And maybe that's what you've become, the soft hum beneath the nation's anthem. The quiet beat behind the headlines. A reminder that change is survivable, that even empires can bow out without losing all their music. Nominal, absolutely. But by not clinging to your throne, you've become something even rarer. A living symbol that everyone agrees on. They say you don't matter anymore. That you're ceremonial. That your role is outdated. Dusty. Polished only for postcards. But tonight, there's a light show projected on your palace walls. And the crowd outside is cheering your name not out of obligation, but out of something deeper belonging. This is soft power, wielded by someone who supposedly has none. And you, the nominal emperor, have learned how to turn pageantry into pressure. Because when you show up at a cultural festival, à tendance double, when you wear a native patterned sash, that region's artisans experience a sales boom. When you mention a dying dialect in your New Year's address, it sparks funding applications from 3 ministries. You don't issue commands. You inspire momentum. Historians still debate whether this soft power was always present in figureheads, or if it bloomed only as traditional power receded. What's clear now is that even a thoroughly ceremonial monarch can shape the national psyche the same way a conductor leads an orchestra without playing a single instrument. A curious example. A modern emperor once attended a theater performance featuring traditional mask drama, an art form on the brink of extinction. He clapped slightly too long. The press noticed. The next month, a funding bill passed unanimously to preserve that very tradition. The emperor never said a word. He didn't have to. You begin to understand this deeply. You start choosing where to be more carefully than what to say. You accept invitations strategically small towns, minority communities, neglected causes. Your presence draws attention. Your absence, even more. You don't sign laws, but you can shape the mood that surrounds them. If a proposal smells of division, your quiet call for unity in a speech about tulips can nudge the nation sideways. Your wardrobe becomes language. Your route through a city becomes signal. Your attendance at a funeral becomes more than condolence. It's a form of sanction. Or solidarity. You live in a world where everything is symbolism. And that gives you a strange new agency. Because no politician wants to be photographed disrespecting you. No minister wants to be the one whose project is not visited. No corporation wants to be seen as ignoring your charitable nod. They call you outdated, but behind closed doors, they scramble for your shadow. Because approval by silence is still approval. It's a quiet sort of influence, but it echoes. And your soft power spreads internationally. 2. Foreign leaders greet you with reverence. Even as they negotiate with your government separately, they know that a smiling photo with you carries more warmth than a trade memo. You host state dinners where no policy is discussed yet, alliances deepen over dessert. You've become ambassadorial without being diplomatic. A kind of royal magnetism that draws sentiment. Tourism. And good faith. And sentiment. In politics. Is dynamite in silk gloves? One day, a child asks you, "What do emperors do now?" You smile, you crouch to meet their eyes, and you say, "We remind people who they are." Because that's the trick. Isn't it? When your country forgets itself in noise and change, you silent, symbolic, smiling remain. You don't declare identity. You reflect it. You hold the mirror. And in that reflection, people see not a ruler, but a version of themselves worth believing in. Nominal. Yes. But soft power doesn't shout. It glows. And yours has never burned brighter. The anthem swells. You stand beside a marble column. Expression solemn. Hands gloved and still. Before you, a field of crosses. Or perhaps a monument of names. Or the silent wreckage of something that once stood tall. Cameras click. The nation watches. You say nothing. And somehow, your silence means more than words. Because today isn't about policy. It's about pain. And when people are in pain, they don't turn to ministers with spreadsheets. They turn to you, the symbol who never changes. The face that stood still while everything else fell apart. You're the emperor in mourning. And this is your finest hour. It's strange, isn't it, in the moments when history stumbles or grief spills into the streets? Your lack of executive power becomes an asset. You don't need to act. You just arrive, and the people exhale. Historians still argue whether symbolic figures like you should step forward in national crises. Some say it politicizes the monarchy. Others insist it's the very reason monarchies persist to be present when no one else can be trusted to speak. Quiet anecdote. After a devastating earthquake, one monarch walked through the rubble alone. No entourage. No press. He picked up a fallen flag and placed it back on a collapsed school. The video went viral. Relief funding increased within the hour. He never spoke to a single official. You understand the power of those moments. You train for them. Your team rehearses every detail, how long you stand, how deeply you bow, how red your eyes may appear, just enough to show emotion, not so much to spark panic. You practice reading names with a steady voice. You master the cadence of silence. And yes, it's performative, but it's also genuine. Because people need ceremony to contain the flood of feelings they can't process alone. You become the container, and that container shapes the narrative. Your presence reframes tragedy. If you are there, it must be historic. If you weep, it's solemn. If you smile, it's healing. If you pause before speaking, the world holds its breath. And when revolutions rise, your existence becomes more than comfort. It becomes a choice, because sometimes the crowd doesn't want more politics. They want a focal point, something unmoving, a reminder of what came before the noise. You're not immune to irony. You know that people chant your name one year, and the next, they might demand your removal. But that doesn't change your role. If anything, it sharpens it. You are the emotional compass of a drifting vessel, not its captain, not its builder, just the North Star. And like any compass, your job isn't to command, it's to orient. To let people know where they are when everything feels upside down. A strange detail during moments of national crisis, your popularity spikes, not because you fix anything, but because you feel something publicly, sincerely. You have no power, but you become the vessel for collective catharsis. When the towers fall, when the floodwaters rise, when the children are lost, they don't want explanations. They want presence. And presence. That's your job now. So you stand still, visible, human. You walk along the line of mourners. You place your hand on someone's shoulder. You offer no wisdom. You simply witness. And in witnessing, you make it real. The camera pans out. The anthem fades. You bow your head one last time. And in that simple gesture, the country sees itself wounded. Grieving. Enduring. Nominal. Yes. But only a nominal emperor can cry on behalf of millions and still leave everyone feeling like they've been heard. You recline in a velvet chair, not a throne. Not anymore. Your coat of arms hangs above, slightly tilted, like it knows its own insignificance. You swirl a glass of water. Not wine, it's a press interview. Not a coronation. Across from you, a journalist clears their throat and asks a question. You've been dodging for decades. Do you still consider yourself emperor? You smile? The polite, timeless smile. The one you were trained to wear since you had baby teeth. I was raised with duty. You reply. Not illusion. They jot something down. Probably misquoted. Because here's the truth. You haven't ruled anything in years. You don't issue orders. You don't sit in council. You don't get briefed by military generals or economic advisors. You're a former monarch. Living in a republic that politely tolerates your presence the way one tolerates antique furniture, charming, but a little in the way. And yet, every month, you receive letters. Hundreds. Sometimes thousands. They're not addressed to Mr. or Citizen. They come marked His Imperial Majesty. Your Grace, the true Emperor. They come from farmers, school teachers, exiles, children. Some ask for blessings. Some ask for money. Some just ask for hope. You answer as many as you can. Not with decrees, but with words. Because now, your throne is not made of gold or law. It's built from paper, from stories, from myth. This is the strange afterlife of empire, a realm of pretenders, claimants, and paper crowns. Historians still argue whether exiled or deposed monarchs retain any real power. Some say they're mere curiosities, footnotes in history books. Others point to moments when their words still moved mountains. Even from abroad. A quirky tale. One former emperor, long exiled, was invited to attend a foreign wedding, not as guest of honor, but as entertainment. He went, and then, in a side room, offered quiet advice to a future president that changed the course of diplomatic relations. His name wasn't in the papers, but his fingerprints were all over the peace treaty that followed. You understand that well? You attend fewer state events now, but more private ones. You're asked to write forewords, endorse charities, attend obscure heritage festivals. You show up, you smile, and then you say something just meaningful enough to be quoted, but never political enough to be cancelled. You become a whisper of authority, a relic with resonance. And for some, you are more powerful than ever, not because you command anything, but because you don't. You're untainted, unentangled. People can project their ideals onto you freely. You become a symbol of what could have been, or what still should be. Your residence is modest. The press calls it elegant restraint. You call it too fewer rooms than necessary. Your staff is small, but loyal, and occasionally, when the world spins too fast, a minister calls to ask, would you consider saying something calming? You do. Not for politics, but for dignity. You've also seen the stranger side of this world. You've met other pretenders, the so-called Empress of Nowhere, the crown prince of a kingdom that last existed during the Napoleonic Wars, the Grand Duke of a micronation who lives in a caravan and insists on formal address while offering biscuits. You don't mock them. You understand them, because the nominal throne is never truly vacant. Someone will always sit in it by blood, by delusion, or by design, and sometimes late at night. When the embers burn low and the staff has gone to bed, you take out your old regalia. You hold it. You remember what it felt like to be bowed to bless ships, to appear on coins, to matter officially, and you whisper not with bitterness, but with something gentler. I'm still here. Because even without a throne, even without a nation, your name still glows. And in the world of claimants and ghosts, that name is a crown all its own. The screen flickers to life. It's late at night, and you're scrolling, just curious, not searching for anything in particular. Then it pops up your face. Slightly exaggerated. In an animated series set in space, you're wearing a golden helmet. You're commanding a galactic empire. You're shouting things like, "Bring me the Starlance," while lasers fly behind you. You blink. Someone, somewhere, decided that you, a historically ceremonial monarch, make a great villain, or savior, or tragic hero. This is nominal empire in pop culture, the final migration of imperial presence from throne to theme. You're not leading a country anymore. You're leading narratives. Historians still argue whether fictional representations of emperors reflect nostalgia, mozere, or subconscious longing for structure in chaotic times. But the reality is, this emperor's cell, their silhouettes are iconic. Their robes are instantly recognizable. Their symbolism is plug and play. You can be adapted into anything. A quirky example. In one popular video game franchise, the final boss is always some form of corrupted emperor, cursed by power, trapped by immortality, and speaking in cryptic Latin. The fans call him the Eternal Majesty. He was loosely inspired by you. Kind of. Sort of. Not really. But enough. Your legacy has become raw material. It's being borrowed, bent, reimagined, turned into memes, graphic novels, board games. You once caught a character in a streaming series wearing your exact coronation outfit except in neon purple. He was a time-traveling lizard. You laughed because this, too, is power. Your image, divorced from politics, become pure iconography. It's not about law anymore. It's aesthetic gravity, a visual shorthand for mystery. Gravitas, tyranny, or even camp, and it works both ways. You receive letters from screenwriters asking permission to loosely model a planetary archon after you approve it with a single, delightful sentence. Make me taller this time. They do. You trend on social media for a day. Children who know nothing about your reign recognize your silhouette in emoji form. Young adults joke that your royal wave is serving monarch core. You don't quite understand what that means, but the museum sells a hoodie with your embroidered crest. And it sells out. So now, you lean into it. You give interviews. You write an autobiography half recollection, half gentle clarification that you never actually had a fleet of golden hoverships. You attend comic conventions. You pose beside artists who turned your life into watercolor webcomics. One time, a student asks during a panel, "Do you feel sad that people remember the idea of you more than your reality?" You think. Then you say, "Ideas last longer." Because that's the gift of becoming a cultural template. You no longer need policy to matter. You don't need votes, armies, parliaments. You are remixed into relevance again and again, repackaged in crowns, battle armor, holograms. You've outlived your government. And you're starring in a musical next spring. Your face, once printed on coins, now appears on stickers. Your gestures, once dictated by protocol, are now TikTok trends, and still, somehow, it's you. In fact, you've never reached more people. They may not know your lineage, your policies, or your treaties, but they feel your myth. Your presence in the world of fiction becomes an ambient hum, a low-frequency reminder that there are figures who endure, who project order, mystery, danger, or hope. Nominal. You transcended that. You left the throne. You climbed into the collective imagination. And there, beyond borders, beyond history books, you continue to reign. In gold leaf, in neon, in fan art and folklore. Not as ruler, but as legend. You sip tea from a porcelain cup embossed with your family crest. It's been decades since anyone bowed out of fear. The Republic is stable now. The archives are open. Your name is a trivia question in some schools, a punchline in others. And yet, When you enter a room, people still straighten their backs. This is what it means to persist in the shadows of history. The nominal throne survives not in power, but in purpose. Because, in a strange twist of fate, it turns out people still need you. Not for governance, for gathering. You are the quiet glue that helps hold the nation's story together. You host seasonal concerts in the old palace courtyard. You sponsor restoration efforts for temples and bridges that bear your ancestors' names. You appear at weddings, funerals, dedications not as ruler, but as thread. Historians still argue whether such figures truly matter in modern states. Some claim it's all decorative nostalgia. Others say your ceremonial presence fills a gap that democracy leaves wide open, the yearning for continuity. For ritual stability in a world that changes too fast. A peculiar fact. In times of political uncertainty, search engine traffic for your name spikes. People Google your biography. They rewatch old footage of your coronation. They post side-by-side comparisons of then versus Ruble IN versus on. Now? They say things like, at least things looked solid back then. You begin to realize your role is not to lead, but to anchor. When elections clash and voices rise, you don't intervene, but you make a quiet visit to a war memorial. You're photographed lighting incense. You say only, "We have come far. Let us not forget." That photo becomes a front page, not because you offered a solution, but because you reminded people that nations don't begin in ballots, they begin in memory. You're not timeless, but you're treated like you are. So you become careful with your presence. You don't over-appear. You don't insert yourself into every narrative. You pick your moments, graduation ceremonies, anniversaries, harvest celebrations. You speak in layers, tradition wrapped in gentle metaphor. A poet once said, "Your speeches are like lacquer, subtle. Durable, reflective." There's an odd moment at a university when a professor refers to you, awkwardly, as a monarch-shaped placeholder. The room laughs. You nod politely. Then, later that day, you receive a letter from a student who was in the room. They write, "You made me feel like my country had a heartbeat again." That's when it clicks. You are not a placeholder. You're a placeholder for stillness. In a time of disruption, you remain, unmoving, not because you're stuck, but because you chose stillness over struggle. And that stillness has become sacred, like a mountain on the edge of a restless sea. You start keeping a private journal. You don't expect anyone to read it. But you write down every ceremony, every person who wept when meeting you, every child who asked if you wear your crown to bed. One day, it may become a book, or maybe it won't. That's not the point. You've learned that not all relevance is loud. And so, quietly, persistently, you continue. You don't reign. You remain. And in doing so, you give your people something rare. A fixed point in the map of their identity. Nominal. Yes. But in a world that trades its memories for headlines, your presence, even unarmed, unvoiced, unthroned, is an act of devotion. To country, to continuity, to the idea that some things, just a few, should stay where they are. You are old now, not in the frail, forgotten way of the quietly retired, but in the venerated way, like a statue that somehow still breathes. Your hair, once dark and combed for the camera, has silvered into soft folds. Your walk is slower. Your smile takes longer to rise. And yet your schedule remains politely full. Because even in your twilight, your presence is requested. Not demanded. Never required. But invited with handwritten notes, embossed cards, careful phrasing, would His Majesty be willing to attend? Might Your Grace consider offering a reflection? And you always go, because you know the real truth of nominal power when it is finally yours alone. It becomes more sacred than sovereign. Your days begin in silence. The staff waits for your bell. Your newspapers arrive already clipped for relevance. Your tea is steeped by someone whose parents once served your coronation. Generations have orbited you like a moon held in place by gravity. They can't quite explain. Historians still argue what to call this phase of your life. Post-royal cultural artifact, semi-retired monarch emeritus. The titles never quite fit. Because you're still something, not law, not symbol, something ambient, like incense at a shrine. A curious anecdote during a national debate about abolishing certain historical holidays, your birthday was on the list. The committee hesitated. Not because they feared backlash, but because no one could bring themselves to say, it doesn't matter anymore. It does. You do. Your birthday remains quietly rebranded as Heritage Day. But everyone knows. You attend it like a guest at your own shadow. And now, as the years fold over you, your role becomes one of gentle surrender. You give away heirlooms. You write letters of encouragement to new civil servants. You pass along recipe. You correct dates in old records. You begin crafting memory into gift. People visit. Not for your opinion, but for your tone. The calm you radiate. The steadiness, the warmth of something that has endured, and continues to do so without complaint. You become the whisper at the back of the national mind. Ah, yes. The emperor still lives. At a state dinner, one of your last, you're seated beside a young prime minister. He thanks you for your years of quiet grace. You smile, raise your glass, and say simply, I tried not to get in the way. Everyone laughs. But you weren't joking. Because the final skill of the nominal emperor is this, knowing when to step back so history can breathe. Not abandon. Not vanish. Just ease gently into the margins. And still you are present. In archives, in traditions, in public parks named for your reign. A child approaches you with a school essay. She asks what it felt like to be emperor. You pose. Then say, like being a mirror everyone looked into, even when I couldn't always see myself. She writes that down. You hope she forgets it until she's older. At night, you walk your favorite corridor lined with gifts from every decade. A statue here. A worn scroll there. A child's drawing of you with a cape and a laser sword. You chuckle. It's ridiculous. And true. Because you were the figure people projected onto. The one who absorbed chaos through ritual. Who turned grief into flowers and worry into flags. Nominal. Yes. But in your final years, you realize something stunning. You've never had more influence, not through control, but through calm. You have become the pause between chapters, the breath between verses, the candle between storms, and when you go, people will not mourn your power. They will mourn your presence. You are lying in bed, not unwell. Exactly. but slow. Slower than ever before. The curtains flutter lightly, drawn against the world outside. You hear birds? Somewhere. Someone is preparing tea. And outside the walls, there's already a line forming, not of courtiers, but of citizens, ordinary people. They've come just to sit near the palace grounds, just to be there, because they know, not because you've said anything your last public words were months ago, but because they can feel it. The nation has its ear to the ground, and the silence says, everything the emperor is fading. And now, as the sun edges across the room, you stare at the ceiling and begin to wonder what kind of story they'll tell about you. Historians still argue how to define the end of an era. Is it marked by war, a law, a moment on television? Or is it something quieter like this? A slow unthreading of presence, the gentle unpinning of a symbol from the wall of national memory. You were never the ruler who conquered, decreed, or reigned with fire. You were the one who remained. And because of that, you have become something gentler. Something people cannot imagine not existing. Here's a curious truth. Even in republics with no monarchy, the public still instinctively invents figures like you. Old presidents are turned into saints. Cultural leaders become ceremonial uncles and grandmothers. Countries without emperors still produce emperor-shaped spaces, a throne for memory to sit on. That's what you are now. The throne. Not seated upon it, but being it. You receive letters daily. Most are never read aloud. You can't take the strain. But the ones they do read make you smile. Thank you for always showing up. I named my son after your grandfather. You held us together when we didn't know how. Your doctors speak in low voices. The staff begins rotating in pairs. Always present, but never intruding. The palace adjusts its rhythm to your breath. And out there, beyond the iron gates, people leave flowers, not bouquets, but single stems, laid gently in the grass. A marigold, a violet, a branch of pine. You once asked yourself, what does a nominal emperor do? At the end, now you know. You receive. You allow a nation to say goodbye, not to power, but to an era. To the myth that steadied them, to the breath that stood still while everything else rushed by. And so, you do what you've always done best. You stay. Present. Visible. Silent. You allow history to wrap around you like a quilt. The stories, the speculations, the state documentaries that are already being edited, the opera that will be composed, the faces of children in classrooms learning your name as both fact and fable. One of your great-grandchildren visits. He holds your hand. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. He'll never rule. He doesn't need to. But he knows what you were. What you still are. He whispers, "You made us more patient." You nod. Just barely. It's enough. Outside, bells begin to ring, not in mourning, but as a reminder, you are still here, and until your last breath, you are still emperor. Nominal. Now more than ever. But that name, emperor, now carries the full weight of a nation's gratitude, not for what you ruled, but for what you held in place by simply staying. The final morning comes gently. There are no trumpets, no declarations, just the hush of linen, the soft rustle of staff moving like shadows. and a single bird singing somewhere beyond the palace wall. You open your eyes. You don't say a word. But you know, so does everyone else. You lie there still, dignified, exactly as you've trained yourself to be for nearly a lifetime. The weight of empire, which once rested on your shoulders as crown and expectation, now lies weightless in the stillness of your breath. They gather outside. Not officials. Not envoys, just people. People who've never seen you in person, but feel as though they knew you. For many, you were born before they were, and still somehow outlasted every storm. And now, they are here, not for a spectacle, but to stand still with you. In a world obsessed with speed, this is the rarest thing of all. You've already prepared everything: the succession, the sealed letters, the speech that will be read aloud in your name. The final message is short. It says, "Only thank you for allowing me to be your stillness." Historians will study your reign and call it many things. Some will praise the soft power you wielded like silk around steel. Others will critique the uselessness of inherited symbols. But most will agree on one thing: you lasted. And by lasting, you meant something. A curious echo. At the end of your long life, artists begin sketching your final portrait, not with crowns or swords, but with open hands, as if you were holding nothing, as if you were offering everything. And when the last bell tolls, and your title is quietly transferred, the nation doesn't erupt, it exhales. The transition is seamless, because that was always your power. You were never the fire. You were the hearth. You didn't command allegiance. You invited it. You didn't define identity. You reflected it back. You didn't speak often, but when you were silent, the silence held. Nominal? Yes, but true in all the ways that mattered. And now, as the country folds you into history with reverence, not as ruler, not as relic, but as rhythm, your name becomes a chapter heading, a melody, a long pause that lets the next phrase breathe.